Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. And today we have a review of a film I've been pretty excited for ever since it was first announced, being Premiere. And to be clear, I knew absolutely nothing about it going into it except that it was being produced by Studio Trigger, and to be perfectly honest, that's usually more than enough to sell me. But as a result, let's give a trigger warning right at the beginning here. This was probably the most trigger-happy Studio Trigger production I have ever laid eyes upon. This film seems practically built on references to previous works, and as a result I will probably be bringing them up quite often in this review, with Gurren Lagann and Kill la Kill in particular, as I am most very familiar with them. I should also point out that this is a non-spoiler review for whatever that's worth. I mean, if you guys want me to do a spoiler review, then feel free to make those feelings known in the comments, but if you haven't seen Premiere, then never fear, because I'm here to talk fairly generally. So from the outset, I should say that Premiere is Studio Trigger's first feature film, and in their classical style, it explodes onto the screen. In terms of pure aesthetics, I've never seen anything quite like this, because there is not a single frame of this film that is not stunningly composed with the unique stylings of this world. And one of the key instruments used to achieve that uniqueness is simple geometry. Premiere subscribes to crafting a world primarily out of straight lines. And if that sounds weird and not so much like a big deal, then I think you really need to have a closer think about what a world without curves would look like. I mean, even the lens flare in this film is square, which I loved, and while certain elements of this world do stand out as very unnatural, like the aforementioned lens flare, it just integrates so well with everything else as a general aesthetic. It actually accomplishes this so well that it makes me wonder why most animated features are so overly concerned with any kind of sense of realism, rather than trying to craft their own individual style. But then again, that's what I have always loved about Trigger and their talented staff. They are one of the very few companies out there willing to take absurd visual creative risks and have the proper backbone to pull it off and make the rest of the anime world look tame by comparison. Now, that isn't to say that there are no curves or circles at all in Premiere. There definitely are, but they are very strategically used is how I would put it, I guess. For the most part, they act as accents to various objects, or they are made to deliberately stand out, like one scene in the film where our main characters are eating pizza. The pizza itself obviously being circular, but it becomes a true focal point of the scene due to that simple factor. And there's a lot more, but the general idea is that shapes are thought about on a minute level in Premiere, and I think this very simple but conscious decision allows for a flood of pure creativity. And that might be because one of my personal mantras has always been that restrictions breed creativity, and Premiere provides the ultimate restriction, being the use of straight lines and sharp angles 95% of the time. And so it results in design solutions that very few individuals would ever land on due to never having the inclination to engage in a core reviewing of the world around them. That really is the only true revolutionary aspect of Premiere though. If you were to strip all of that away, you would still have a solid film, but if you're familiar with the work of those currently at Trigger, then you won't necessarily find anything new to take from Premiere. And I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing either. However, it is exceptionally evident, nay purposeful, that Premiere exists as something of a mission statement for Trigger going forward. It's sort of like a "this is who we are, hello world" type of thing. And in order to accomplish that, it draws heavily from past productions in every aspect of storytelling, be it characters, action, or the plot itself. And the most immediate striking similarity is that of the protagonist Gallo, who as far as I'm concerned is Kamina. There is no real attempt to differentiate the two, and despite the fact that Trigger have stated that any similarities are purely coincidental, I think the fact that they're so similar is the point. And at first it can seem like lazy design, going back to the well of ideas that worked so wonderfully once upon a time, but that feeling is quickly dispelled when you swiftly come to realize that the entire plane of Premiere is a gigantic mashup of former works. It's like the staff of Trigger took everything they'd ever worked on and smushed it together, and with that in mind, I like the choice to have the Kamina-like character be our protagonist because he was a fantastic gateway into Gurren Lagann, and he does exactly the same thing here. He's a loud, flamboyant moron whose passionate soul has the power to change the world. Plus, due to the nature of his established personality, he is perfect to helm a 2-hour film, because I guess you could go with characters like Simon or Ryuko, but they require much more of a journey to develop as characters, like an entire TV series worth. And that's very important because Premiere sits at just under 2 hours, and the story it wants to tell does not allow the time for exceptional character growth. It requires individuals who are going to adapt swiftly to new stimulus, and once again, Gallo/Kamina is your guy to do this. Rather unfortunately though, this does mean that the extended cast get a fairly minimal amount of time dedicated to them. I mean, there are probably 5 characters in Premiere that we really delve into, and I use the word unfortunately in relation to the greater cast because they all have exceptional designs and personalities that I wanted to explore so much more than we got to. Like, you can see their potential so clearly, but due to the medium of film, it just cannot allow for them to truly shine the way a TV series would. And oddly enough, the character I think you can see this most clearly in is Vinny, who is the rat mascot of Burning Rescue, the organization that Garlo and his posse work for. He is adorable in every scene that he's in, and you just know that if this was a 24 to 27 episode series, that Vinny would easily become that iconic mascot in the same fashion as Buta in Gurren Lagann or Guts in Kill the Kill. But while I do think it's a shame that we didn't get to know the extended cast that little bit more, I can't do anything but offer wild praise to the film for creating a world of people that I did actively want to become more invested in. I mean, in a lot of other productions, I can imagine that these characters would have been heavily neglected in terms of both design and performance in order to draw focus to the primary cast by default. But Studio Trigger refuses to neglect these characters in that aspect, and I very much appreciate that. And while we're here, almost all of these characters do take inspiration from previous works as well. So it isn't just Garlo. Cray Foresight is another one that immediately comes to mind, because visually, let's be real, he is what would have happened if Gamagori and Rossiu had a love child. That's just how it is. And Aina, the main female protagonist, seems very much like a mashup of Yoko and Ryoko, who also happens to pilot her mech just like Zero Two from Darling in the Franxx. References and nods are everywhere, but I can't help but smile every time I recognize something because I have such fond memories of all of these series. I mean, maybe not so much Darling in the Franxx, but everything else. In terms of the story, this is easily the weakest element of Premiere. The story is... well, it's there. It exists and it does what it sets out to do, but it's nothing special. In fact, I would be willing to bet that if you could not speak Japanese and you watched Premiere without subtitles, you'd still be able to understand the majority of the greater plot. Like everything else, the story and its beats borrow heavily from previous titles, so much that watching Premiere actually felt like I was watching an abridged version of a TV series that I had already seen before. Like, it's not that I could predict everything that was about to happen, but it all felt incredibly familiar for the entire stretch of the film. Although, speaking of predictability though, like I said, I couldn't predict everything, but Premiere is not a film that invests heavily into the idea of plot twists or any sort of directional shift that you weren't expecting. For example, the characters, with the exception of maybe Leo, are all very standard, but I don't mean that in a bad way. It's more that as soon as a character was introduced, I knew exactly what their purpose in the story was going to be, which may potentially remove something nice for the journey we're about to go on, because I always prefer not to know the destination, but that's just what it was. And it doesn't necessarily really matter, because even knowing all of that, Premiere is still incredibly enjoyable due to all of the work put into every other aspect of the film. But I have to say that a lot of that work went into action. Because oh boy, this film can get pretty insane during its action sequences. I legitimately don't think I've ever seen action with more attention to detail placed into it than what is on display in Premiere. Every time someone or something kicked into gear, I knew I was in for some sort of visual feast, although what I will say is that at times it was possible for it to be a bit too much. Like, a lot of the time the background and foreground can blend very easily due to the overwhelming use of vibrant color in both of them, and when this gets applied to fast moving sequences, there are times when all I saw was a blur of incomprehensible stuff right in front of me. However, in all fairness, I should also say that I had a splitting headache when I saw Premiere, so that may have had something to do with it. But the thing is that even if I wasn't able to visually consistently place everything that was going on, it still had me very much on board, and it actually made me want to watch it again to properly appreciate it. There's a lot of master artistry to love in Premiere, and I guess that might be what my action complaint is. There's too much artistry to possibly appreciate it all in a single viewing, which, you know, on the spectrum of problems, I think is a pretty good problem to have. Far better than having a film which is completely lacking and a slog to get through. At no point during Premiere was I ever tired of what was happening, even with the headache. But you know, that's just the result of shifting your efforts to the realm of visualization in cinema. Because you can have the greatest story ever written with the most wonderful characters ever performed, but it's all for nothing if you can't convey it visually, which is what films are. Visual media. And I feel like a lot of projects may, oddly enough, come to forget that. But as a result, it is possible to go balls to the wall with aesthetics based on a bare bones story and archetypal characters and still have it be an incredible experience. I would highly recommend Premiere to anybody, not just Trigger fans and definitely not just anime fans. I mean, yes, the high energy won't be everybody's loaf of bread, especially if you're gluten intolerant, but I think the Premiere actually acts as a very solid ambassador for anime. It's a very good, short, condensed gateway experience. If you have friends or family that you'd like to introduce into this world, and you know what, even if you don't, go and see it anyway. On the big screen if possible, because I suspect the Premiere might lose a lot of its full-on force on smaller screens. Plus, amazingly enough, it's a film that makes decent use of CGI. I didn't mention that before, but the use of 3D modeling, even in anime films, is often fairly cringe and unnecessary to me. It doesn't generally add anything, but with the geometric focus of Premiere, it contributes significantly to the feel of the world. So no worries there. But yeah, I loved Premiere. Not as much as Gurren Lagann or Kill the Kill, and it was nothing earth-shattering, but it was a highly enjoyable experience, provided by a pretty phenomenal production company, and as always, I'm keenly awaiting their next project. But that pretty much does it for this non-spoiler review of Premiere. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produces in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your thoughts on Premiere. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.